ediri mu constitution eya freedom of speech. You are an encyclopedia of law. And to work more light about this.
Fundamentally, you know, nti Article 43 creates certain provisions, edigemagana ni exceptions to what would actually argue nti ebyandibayire ebitayikirizibwa kuko nagana nanono da semateeka. Semateeka Article 43 eyina byeyinonola 44 actually 44 byekoba nti ebyandibayire non-derogable principles editayina kugemebwako principles, for example nga fair hearing, principles like for example not subjugating individuals to servitude, principles for example like habeas corpus, about 4 principles. The question that I will pose to you, my brother Samuel, are they touchable? Are they derogable? Are they things that you see every day? Abantu nga bali infringing oba nebintu semateeka de protecting. Even before we begin arguing these other provisions as protected under Article 28, the question I'm asking myself, before we begin making noise of freedom of press, freedom of expression, as enshrined under Article 28, and the exceptions created therefore by Article 43, even the case of Onyango of Onyango Obo, you know, and Andrew Mwenda versus Attorney General, which actually created Section 50 of the Penal Code Act as being inconsistent and therefore not substantive in law. The question, do we really have law, to use your very wording, do we even have the rule of law in this country? If you are promulgating a new law, called Computer Misuse Act 2022, and yet some of the elements are already captured in subsisting laws, and those laws are very evident. Even the issues to do with children and minors, all those arguments are actually propounded in 2 major laws, those cyber laws. I think the problem we have is, number one, the ignorance of the populace that we have, but also the ignorance of the promulgators of these laws. Because if you can go ahead and promulgate a law that is quote unquote nugatory, and it really has no, and I'm not saying it has no legal basis, no, but I'm only saying that because TBD geza kukuyamba, over they are actually intended to target individuals, or they are simply propounded by individuals who want to be rewarded at the end of the day. Those are all different schools of thought.
Nga tukali kulingira de computer misuse, abantu bakuba nti banama yava yakuba nti nditolebwako eddembe lyange erya freedom of press, ondi yakuba nditolebwako eddembe lyange erya freedom of speech. Aye amateeka ago gakola freedom of press likolanga we lirina okola, freedom of speech likolanga we lirina okola, nti liri kwida kituufu liritoolawo gano oba eriri kwida liri kwagana nga wazira kiriwo.
Ekibuuzo kyolibuuza kyavunanzi, but the question I will ask you was also answered in the question of Navagesera and others, I think, and 11 others versus Attorney General, where which is the 2022 case, by the way, where they were arguing and they were saying that these individual rights, are they untouchable, if I may use that word? And the argument, the proposition under the judicial officers argued about Kobant, Chitu Fudi Sobolo Gemak, as long as those they are actually affecting the order of perhaps public interest, and as long as they're not propounded for purposes of political persecution. Remember that public interest vis-a-vis political what? Persecution. The question before you and I is, Ganamateke Gabari Kubega, are they for public interest or for of political persecution?
It could be somebody's judgment.
That is the question of debate.
Of course, sometimes omuntu ayinza okuba. Remember okwida ko iteeka lyali lya Order Management Act. A section of people bakoba iteeka bali bagire opposition. Kubanga babaire bali kwenda bafuna banatuvungizanga. And that could be a judgment of opposition nti ngeri yali bwine mulityo aya balileta with a wider scope of TV opposition.
Okay, that is a good question and a good answer to your problem. But you see, the question is this. Behind every law, there is a mischief. Mischief is the intention. You take a change and okuwonya obokudiringa nacho. Remember this.
Who discovers that misuse?
That is a good question.
Alileta oba gwe baliretera?
Alileta, promulgator, ni policy. Presidential, for example, ministers have a policy. They come up with a policy bakati how we intend to make a law because of a basis, because waliwo kino. And then they make, you know, they make parliament, they move parliament. Okube gaitekeje. The Itekali Kogeraku was propounded by my Obian classmate, Honorable Sereko. For whatever reason, he knows best. I will not go into that argument. As he's a lawyer, and I'm also surprised that even members of parliament were able to, you know, append their signatures on such a law without really discussing and looking at the nitty-gritties of that law.
They couldn't.
Let me explain a few things. Let me go one by one. This law, for example, as it comes into resonance, is intended to cure certain acts over omissions. But this law, other laws that have to do with cybercrime, for example, have been existent. I'll give you 5 examples of people that those laws have targeted. And I want to argue between me and you.
The other existing laws?
Yes, in terms of computer misuse or cyber crimes or whatever. Whether they are targeting the ordinary person like you and I, Samuel, or they have been politicized. Stera Nyanzi, Kakwanza, Jim, Henry Tumukonde, what is this group, a comedy group, Bazonto. How many are those? Those are about 5. So all those people I'm trying to explain in terms of this law.
And they have become, they are fellow victims of the, they are fellow victims of the law.
Auntie, but you see, the question is, who are they targeting? Is this law made for you and I, or is it targeting political opponents? That's why I'm telling you that according to the case, Nabageseda and 11 others versus Attorney General, the argument that these individual rights can actually be infringed upon as long as they are not political persecutions. But the question before you and I is, are these laws made to politically persecute people?
Understood you when you give us these examples, Bazonto, Kakwenza, and the Stera Nyanzi. So what do you mean? That some laws were put in place because of them, or for laws were put in place and these people were the first victims?
You see, as I told you, the biggest problem we are facing with this nation is the ignorance. Ignorance and excusat, my friend.
Of which side?
Of everyone. First of all, the promulgators and the populace itself. Ask me why. I am a person who has written a book called Cyber Law in Uganda. When you look at cyber law, and this is my surprise to the nation, that the arguments that are propounded by this country, even as we speak today, either the promulgators of this law fell short of appreciating the law, or could expanding covering out what would be argumentally captured under cyber law. You know, there are many things that this law could have targeted that did not target.
Cyber law?
Yes. This very law that we're talking about, computer misuse. Talk about internet and cyber crimes. Talk about email hackings. Talk about cyber hooliganism. Talk about trolling. Talk about things to do with the women, perhaps image rights or women or in nudity in terms of that. There are many things that you would have put in this law rather than putting flimsy excuses that have already been captured in already an existent law.
Is Computer Misuse Act a dilute of the cyber law? Or is it a photocopy or reprint? It's a photocopy, it's a misnomer, it's a law that has to be revised, for lack of a better word. Because whereas its intentions are good, but I think its framers did not sit down by arguing in terms of cyber issues. We have many cyber issues that we could actually argue. We have cyber hacks, for example, internet frauds, for example, money laundering frauds that have to do with even protection of corporates.
You know, there are many things that this law could have captured, rather than targeting individuals because of petty things. You know, because you are simply intending to
maybe that's the majority that we have, then that's the problem. We could be having the majority and it's the problem. So let's go down. Is it micromanaging? And we micromanage the individuals. I
think the problem is lack of having substantive consensus from substantive individuals who can actually educate them. Legal gigantums like some of us.
We have the members of the parliament.
Many of them are, do you know how we elect the members of parliament? Celebrities, because a moving wind has swept in a certain direction. and then people, every Tom, Dick and Harry becomes a member of parliament just because he's ascribing to a particular party. Let's have substantive people who have sound and reason to argue in the law, to represent the demands of the people, rather than people who could simply raise up their hands because their stomachs are satisfied.
Counsel, alibo na Baba TV tulikulingirira eiteka president yalitaire ku mukono lyafuuse eiteka okubita mu kuwakanizibwa okunene nti at least amateeka gabitanga bannayuganda abandi baawuyabuuye nti gaabise ayi no lyagire n'otuuka president olisayininga nga bannayuganda batandise okuba enduulu oyenda akoba nti palamenti yabisiisa iteeka ye nga kyebisiisa ebisiisa yona tetuukaana nga nikyebisiisa kyona kyabeire kikaali kufumbibwa kutuukaana.
Absolutely. Ekintu kye bakoze was premature nga bwenkobye. It is completely ambiguous. It is actually already inconsistent with the provision, with the Supreme Court ruling, by the way, which is actually being challenged. Even as we speak now, there's a petition in Constitutional Court.
And not one.
Not one, because we are actually about 13 people together with the Digital Limited, something actually going to begin to ask court to express itself in terms of the constitutionality of that provision, where there is already a ruling.
So, we have a ruling, a Supreme Court ruling.
Absolutely.
Which nullifies the presence of this law.
Absolutely. Section 50 of the Penal Code, which was actually rendered null and void. You know? So
does this tell that we are no longer in the rule of law?
No, I think the question, as I told you, is ignorance and an excuse that the entire populace is ignorant. The framers of the framers of the laws themselves seem to be ignorant. If not, they are simply satisfied and they are hoodwinked and they are simply agitated in terms of propounding their ideologies because they want to be rewarded. I told you, whoever comes and gets something done in Parliament for the good of a particular individual will be rewarded. Very soon you'll be here, those individuals. It's a question of, let me play your game and then you reward me somewhere. And those appointments of ministers and the likes, you'll be seeing them very soon.
These are games.
These are games, and because they were not serving the nation. As I said, before you pass a law, do substantive investigation. Go and consult the populace. Find out what issues each of the ordinary people. Cyber law is the future of this country tomorrow. Talk about countries like America and Russia. You remember a whole election was turned because of cyber crimes and cyber issues. Those are the things we want to talk about, where election can actually be turned. People's monies, internet frauds, bettings, for example. There's BLQ, which has actually defrauded people recently.
And no one has given
no
it
one has actually given up. Those are things we could
by the way, I just came to understand that thousands and millions of Ugandans had invested in
absolutely.
In that betting style of...
Absolutely. And these are the questions that we're talking about. And then you are simply victimizing people who are saying, and you know the problem is again ignorance, as I told you. The ordinary use of an ordinary Ugandan in terms of a phone gadget is simply WhatsApp and TikTok. That's all. Predominantly. That's all they know they're going to use about their phones. But you see...
they still use Facebook.
And now you're the very people saying we are putting a law. You're the very people who actually go ahead and block the internet when the time comes to elections, forgetting that the internet is even a human right protected by UN conventions. Read my book, Cyber and the Law in Uganda. This is the problem with you. Ignorance and excuse that. Even the issues of organ trafficking that you're talking about, you know, I wrote about them in criminology and penology. Ignorance of the law. People don't want to read. People don't want to think outside the box. People are simply moving. And that's what I think Adolf Hitler said. He said he realized that soft-mindedness was so popular amongst the people that he began using reason for the few and emotion for the many. So this nation thrives on emotions rather than reason.
Tuyinza okuba nti tuyinza obutanenya nti parliament yabisisa kiyabeere taidi twakoba nti parliament eyinza okuba yakibisisanga ekidi nga yakibikiriza omuntu ajja oba rewarding at certain moment.
Good question. There is no smoke without what?
Fire. But as if it is so hidden nti wokiringirira muzira ino kulya.
Who told you? When this law is good, this law is a direct infringement upon freedom of rights, a direct infringement upon the rights of expression. Are you aware? Right now, I can tell you for a fact that Mulimwensi, for example, that have grad revolutions on the basis of simple clips, video clips, revolutions in North Africa, where a woman burnt herself and then someone caught it on video, caused the whole revolution. Revolutions in America, for example.
Even here in November last, when we had that serious strike.
Absolutely.
We had never had it in campaigns.
Yes, George Floyd. Remember the George Floyd issue, America?
I can't breathe.
I can't breathe issue, which I've also talked about, by the way. Under that book of criminology and penology, I can't breathe. I make all these arguments.
If the fountain of honor appended the signature ya signingaku, eiteka liliwakanizibwa saawa eno with more than petition is diwezi ngate wodiringirira diringe diri genuine weliba overturned kija setting a precedence chi.
I think the problem is not even overturning the itaker. The problem is revisiting the itaker and trying to get stakeholders so that they can actually boost this itaker and make it user friendly. I've told you about crimes, cyber crimes. I've mentioned about 10 of them that this itaker would have actually targeted. But it is not targeting because of ignorance of the people. We don't know that. Or because we're simply saying my video gadget or my phone is intended to harass you somewhere, and therefore I'm only looking at somewhere in that capacity.
So if I'm blocked to harass him, the world has ended.
And that's the argument I'm telling you, because our minds are so thin that they're only looking at one angle. How I wish the world is opened in terms of cyber law is the next future generation. People are talking about 5G technology now. The world is changing at a supersonic speed. We're talking about hypersonic missiles now. You know, we're talking about 5G technology. So the world is going digital. And digitalizing this world demands that we have a law that protects us against cyber crimes and the rest, rather than targeting these petty things that have to do with whether or not someone is playing a TikTok, whether or not someone is recording me. Because how many lives have been saved because someone has actually recorded a clip of a felony taking place somewhere, you know? And then you remember recently there was even an instance of a child you remember that story? And it went viral, and then
the police is using such incidents to track.
Now if you're saying because this is a minor, I need to seek permission from the guardian or from the father to do that,
and the guardian ina ali kuba nkurecording enko ntimuna oli kuba omwana aye nkurecording nenda hata okatambika.
You get the point. So I think the question is, we need to first of all educate the nation, but also to educate people in terms of understanding this law, but also broaden it, not narrow it.
Can I say politics, the love of politics has covered the conscience of leaders in Uganda?
I think, as I told you, it's a question of eating. When people reach the high table, they eat. All their mind is want to fill their stomachs, and they're not interested in the interest of the ordinary person anymore. If anything, they're only propounding. I told you, I've given you 5 examples of what these laws have actually been doing. But they have actually, the people that I mentioned are all political. None of them is actually civil. It was only recent that I heard that I've actually arrested someone who has been propounding on things like TikTok, the likes of Lumbo, they're targeting people. People who are political, rather than talking about things that, how you can hack, Samuel's email, how you can hack his credit card. Those are the things that I want to hear, because that's where we are going.
I had a friend, mukwano gwange bamweta Nantume. Ampereza nga batwire mitwala 5 kwa akaunti ye ya mobile money. Aye nga ligezaako okuba mu network mu those telecom companies. Ngalaga nti bali mulaga nti there is no hope. Ngata za watandi.
Absolutely.
And ekyo kirikuba banji. Nti omuntu aja yafa nga nalina pin code ya isimu ya account ye. No one will ever ask nti omuntu wafa nga mobile money kwali ku sent. Ainga password ne yafa nayo.
What happens?
Sente do dijao.
So I think the idea nga we have to organize and make it broader, rather than simply I wouldn't have a problem with the law. My problem is that the law was passed prematurely. There was no substantive investigation. There was nothing in terms of input or kubantuba stakeholders. And therefore, we ended up duplicating already an existing law. And to me, that's where the problem becomes.
What is the future of those petitions, as you could see?
Absolutely. I mean, the question is going to speak for itself. There's no doubt that it's going to be rendered null and void for all intents and purposes. Because, I mean, first of all, there's duplicity and government COVID. Number 2, it is unconstitutional by virtue of section, the Supreme Court ruling of Charles Onyango versus Attorney General. You know, the pronouncement to that effect. But as you know, the problem we have again is sometimes we have a judicial system that is more executive minded than the executive themselves.
Kampumule muku ndija kubatenga ndira sobola okubatenga tulingirira ku nsonga eddira ku awo ninze Samu Mwesigwa program the platform tavaa tulikuya nkweso saa mukulu tukale ku Baba TV neno program the platform ninze Samu Mwesigwa wetujine mukulu tube tukamaliriza ensonga eno but of course ekali n'ebintu bingi ebyokulingako byetasobola kubatenga tumalayo lwakaire. Kino kibaire kiti nti Parliament yebaga amateeka era ku Lwomukaga nali wano nga nina gwe ndi kwogera naye nakuba nti ku mulembe gwa Honorable Anita Among Parliament erina speed yeribagira ku amateeka. Obungi obw'amateeka guno buyinza okulowoozeza nti Uganda tuyise ekitiibwa muyise mateeka. Tukoba nti Parliament amateeka gano gona negabaga with the interest of individual interests obeeka akola omulimu aye nga taidi nti the final stage of iteeka limaliriza nga tirikoze because apart from lino nti libaire ni criticism y'abantu nti omuntu libonanga libagema amateeka mangi gabise n'abantu bakaidi bagakakola gatya application yago ganoonya nga togabona omulimu gwa Parliament nga bakakola every time babaga amateeka nti webabaze eiteeka ebagula eiteeka erya organ transplant amendment bill 2022 baliva balikuwa omukulembeze w'eggwanga yona liteekwa omukono lyendi isuubira nti lisobola oba ne chances omukulembeze okulya sentinga pressure eyo are fueled with the individual interest oba ni muiteeka lino balibonanga kina kyejjotaasa because we've had these cases for many quite long. Minister of Gender yatuuka n'okuba abantu abali gender wa Uganda and companies dibekebedenga nti olijja kuli olina ensigo ibiri woba oli kwira woba olina ndala tegere nti bagikutoleramu eyo amateeka galina wandi wegayambira nga wandi tigayambe and particularly ku this singa lino erya organ transplant libanga libisenga iteeka lijja kuyamba oba tiriyambe.
The first time they take a revert to Parliament, I think by Dr. Cheng, was it Chen? Ruth, right?
Minister of Health.
Yes. The intention could have been well positioned, but I think generally have outside outcries that for a long period of time there were silent deals, under organ trafficking without actually Ugandans, the major Ugandans knowing exactly what was taking place. And people made a lot of money, by the way. People made a lot of money. Yes, it had started a long time ago. So innocent Ugandans, even about Walanga Korea, sometimes, like you rightly said, they take them for, operations, and they by the time they wake up out of their whatevers, they discover certain parts are missing, and people made lots of money. Especially the young ladies in most of those so-called Arabian countries, so we are told. Nti omuzungu right now, it's no longer a question of whether or not alibare. It's a question of identifying an innocent black girl somewhere, bamutaram uterus, and then to transplant it in the other individual. And yes, and then the woman gives, and the other fella starts giving birth. So there's a lot kidneys, like you rightly pointed out. So this law had good intentions to stop commercialization of organ cells, body cells, and organs and the like.
But do we need the law to stop it, and how did it begin?
The point is that in spite of the fact that there was no law, therefore there was a need to form a law. There was no substantive law covering organ trafficking, as it were. There was an anti-trafficking law, yes, but now the problem is that, again, when they actually made the law to protect or perhaps to enhance people who had good intentions or could donating, for example, there are people who are realizing, okay, there is a fella, kidney Teddy Bulungi, and he makes a plea. And Samuel says, well, I think I can survive with one kidney. It's okay, operate on me without even giving me money. I've told him kidney to Yambo Mutu, Akolechi. There are people like those. There are those innocent issues that we are talking about. But behind that, before that, waliwo ekintu ekigemagana ne trafficking those organs nga tuligezaako.
And my question is, we are bringing the law as a stick, not the carrot, but we bring the law as a stick okutolawo the existing vice. But then, is the law the solution to kill the vice? And how did the vice begin? As other vices begins in the country, and the existence of laws, has they helped to remove those vices that intended to kuleta amateeka ago?
So Uganda Human Donation and the Transplant Act 2022 nga wenkobye, its intentions is very clear. Okugezaako okwenhancing ebintu ebyandibaire birungi. You know, donating in the good doing. Absolutely. Also, it also has penalties, or it has levies very, very serious penalties for people actually who engage it in terms of commercialization, to a tune of 2 billion shillings, to a life imprisonment. Those are the penalties actually that are prescribed, you know, for people who engage. No wonder you have just had a story today of that doctor you just mentioned about, who they are arguing that he had an issue, perhaps covering up an issue of an individual saying...
It began with the younger man of 25 years, Muhammad Skabanda.
Absolutely.
Says, I got an accident, I went here, they operated me, and the younger man alago olutungo kunda, bamusala. Yabuza omusawo lwaki munsaze wano nga bwe abere ku mutwe. Atwatwere wanendi ku nyama. Like,
I know, for surgery and for facial whatever,
and what?
Plastics, those things. So those are...
So to tukalia police and Minister of Health is saying to linonereza is it image center something bafulumya report bagihandingira over Dr. Moses Byaruhanga owa akola ku health services mu police basoma report nti Muhammadu Kabanda okusinza kunonereza ejiro ekisawo yazalibwa n'ensigo ndala. And the question is, abasawo abamusala munda batoola muki?
Good question. And the allegations of bribes nga buli duledi kuida to the tune of 25 million shillings, all those questions of debate. Let's think restrict ourselves to the position of the longer polikeze ikokoba. The law, or in terms of protecting abantu, in terms of commercializing organs in Edo, is a good law because it protects your child, my brother, my sister.
Me,
it protects
and my younger daughter to Mwebazi.
Absolutely, it protects you in a sense that if any person is held culpable for that particular, offense, then the penalty is extreme, going COVID, the tune of 2 billion shillings or life imprisonment. But the question, as you and I have very well understood, it is far much beyond the petty players. Jinemizana tujizanibwa ba lukewarm people, poor people like you and I. It is done by people, absolutely. It's done by super heavy, very rich people who actually engage in this kind of trade. To be honest with you, you'll be surprised that even some of them may actually be individuals of high caliber and high standing, and if they engage in this kind of things, opponent babisao to make money. So the law is good intention, and I think we should support the law. The problem is enforceability. And I think is the question.
Even when ngatuvire the cartel, which I may call the cartel, the handful of individuals abayinza okubanga ba high class, niwe twandiwe tuligobera amateeka. Do we trust the judiciary?
Good question.
Nti mutairemu ekibonerezo kya 2 billions and life imprisonment tugemye omwami X tuli mutryinga in law in judiciary. Aye, what is the record of the judiciary of Uganda? Can we test the judiciary ente jatu yamba okutuukiriza justice nga nabali emisango negiriyo jona jidemyo the petty cases?
Good question, and that's why I will invite you to read my book, Jebeta, Demystifying the Fountain of Honor, the Executive Constitutional Mandate, where I make those arguments in terms of when the judiciary becomes more executive-minded than the executive itself. I will also invite you, since you are a legal scholar, to read my legal mentor, Professor Oloka Onyango's book, When Courts Do Politics. What again, in some of these things, actually, you may actually find yourself that the stooges, those individuals who hold themselves in those quote-unquote judicial positions, may end up actually be stooges or actually appeasers of particular individuals, and therefore they are sitting in these places to simply rubber stamp decisions or aspirations eda abantu bana babateri mu power. And I'm not making any particular quotation on a particular individual, but we shall get there. One of the discussions that you probably are going to open up is the issue to do with Dr. Chisache's issue. The debate between whether or not Dr. Chisache can actually sue her boss in court, in a constitutional court, you know.
But before we reach there, so twali tuli discussing this ku Saturday nali n'omusawo wano yakwata okuidako iteeka lino tikulijja kuyamba kuli kuleeta bizibu because kuli kuopeninga abantu ebirowoozo nti it is possible nti ensigo and parts of and human organs dirimu esente nga mwena alaga nti the desperation of Ugandans webanategeera nti this is also a source of income nti iteeka mukuli discussing we are just opening minds of people others bajatandika okwewaayo babatoolemu ebitundu bino abandi bajawamba abantu banaibwe kubanga bali babona nti any moving human being is a source of income.
Absolutely.
So nti okwida okweiteeka yandibere isigala bwe twadiringa ne bakalculate silently.
That is a good reasoning again, but I see sweeping something under the carpet doesn't help much, because eventually the things will come out.
It may be small, but if we expose it and if man say, hey, of all this time we have been having this,
it will grow legs, my brother. Bokoboti akapala katono or leopard intono kubanga kalioti kapusi kakabewa kaka, it will grow and become big eventually, and eventually it might end up chewing you. You see, that is the problem. We should not think in terms of this problem being small. We should think in terms of tomorrow's generation. How are we able to protect the posterity of tomorrow? So amateka gano, much as you guys look immediately now, or much as you may think, okay, abantu abasinga bayinza taking a, surely there will always be those bad sides of every law. There's no doubt about that. But for the better part, we have to be optimistic in life.
At which percentage do we expect for it to benefit the local person?
Majority, because sensitizing people about it actually creates awareness. For example, now, if those days very many people were in a hurry to Alaban to go and do those odd jobs where in Saudi Arabia and whatever those countries, as you are aware. Right now, people are like, because they are hearing stories, they are hearing things, they are hearing so many things that are happening there. So sensitization again helps us. Again, it's a question of the media, the freedom of media and expression. The issues of value comment, maybe WhatsApp, these other computer misuse, whatever that are coming, which in essence is actually helping to sensitize the majority of people, and being able to fight for their own rights and protect their own interests. So I think the opening and broadening the space is actually enlightening the people.
But then talk about my argument. The sensitization is going to create a negative awareness. Omusaira alingirira abaana be 10 amaze emyaka n'emyaka tazimbanga kunumba takulanga ku motoka ayi bali mu kuba nti singa otunda ensigo yo ojafuna obugaiga musaira akuba nti after all nze nkairi nze kaneweeyo batwale buli kimu mbako mutwale omutima mutwale ensigo buli kimu nze nfe muwadana abaana bange esente oba akobe nti mono omukazi meba n'abaana oba ono senga I
know
that isn't it going to become a source of insecurity in the community?
Those arguments will all be propounded, whether it is there or not. I mean, it's like, for example, the illusion of Illuminati, or, you know, that people say, or the illusion of witchcraft, for example.
Because you told me you wrote about Illuminati.
Yes, I wrote about a book called Witchcraft, Illuminati and Sorcery in Uganda. And it's incredible. You have to look out for it. You go to lubogo.org or suegeneslawup.com and you find it. And it's a hot piece because it will help you educate you about the things that we're talking about. All the books that we've written, right now probably about 30 and running, are all ground-breaking books. We are sailing in what they call uncharted waters. We write things for the future. That's why all the things that we're talking about, the cyber laws you're talking about, the issues of organ trafficking, we've talked about them already. It's a question of simply going to lubogo.org and find these books, and they are free. This is my gift to the world.
Okay, we shall appreciate, and very soon we shall celebrate when you're still alive.
Amen.
Today, just very early in the morning, when I was still thinking about this organ transplant something, I did think about the mothers. Abajja mu cesarean section. Bamulongoosa okumutola mu omwana. And abasawo nabo n'obulamu bwe. How best can we protect now those people? Nti omuntu ono tibaidde amutoola mu nsigo, tibajja amutoola mu kibenda, kubanga bali mulongoosa. The organs are exposed to the vultures.
Let me tell you, that story, Jolly Gezaku, is a question of also enforcing what they call health and the law. Not that. You're a legal scholar. Health and the law, which was a question propounded by my friend, Professor Ben Tunomugisha. Actually, Niata and Kakosia, Health and the Law in Uganda. But one of the leading cases, which is Idi Mulago, that case of Idi Mulago versus Sehad, was an issue of actually a lady whose kid, who gave birth to twins, and then they argued that one of them had died. But when the fella came back to life after, you know, that unconscious state, asked for the second baby, and they said, by the way, one and they said, no, bring the body. When they bring the body, they realize there are certain issues. I think they had switched. So these questions of yolk raising have actually happened in our country, you know. But you see,
where shall we get the protection?
We don't even have an act in as far as health provisions are concerned in the law. Where I know there are bills before Parliament, some we are told, but we don't even have an act. The only decisions that we depend on are decisions by Justice Mugamba, which have to do with the argument of justiciable. The national objective principles in the Constitution have that element captured there. So Justice Egon Antende and other judicial officers have actually alluded to them, but we don't even have substantive provisions that guarantee the rights. We don't even have a proper health policy. So these are things I think this country should talk about. That's why I told you, you are either hiring the wrong people or bring the wrong people to Parliament, or the whole center of governance is proponed by people who are egocentric and they're only interested in their own selfish aggravatement rather than proponing the interests of the ordinary people.
Umuntu eyankoban, sometimes people doesn't want to be quoted with the wrong the generation. Sometimes don't take part in making decision with those who lead in that generation. When such professors like you fear to go to leadership because you feel like the generation may be spoiled and your voices may be small to cause change. But then the shine is like this. Parliament nebaga amateka. I bali mu parliament on political. Ise mateka gwe baba gawa president obuyinza okulonda isabalamuzi. Isabalamuzi alijja okukuuma ise mateeka n'okumutuukiriza. Nti isabalamuzi yakola nga alina eyamulonda. Ng'ate alikola mu ife tulikoba nti alinga ali kuweereza ine eyamulonda. Parliament esobola okukyusa amateeka agaawe yalonda isabalamuzi obuyinza gakyuke. Bona balinga abaliwo on favors of oyo yalonda isabalamuzi. And
that point you've raised, by the way, is also something that I've already written about in my book, The Executive Constitutional Mandate, where I make those arguments differentiating the three arms of government, legislation, judiciary, and executive. Do we even have those separation of powers anymore? Or we only have one that muzzles all, and the others are simply dancing at the tunes of that one power? That's the question you're asking.
But this one who gave him power.
Who gave him the power? He fought.
Parliament gives this person power, so he uses the power, and again you say, is overshadowing the parliament and other organs.
I think you must understand the politics of this country, that you'll be able to discover that some of these decisions are not actually made by decisions of parliamentarians. And that's the argument that was prompted by our friend, you remember, the former speaker, when she went on media and made certain strong allusions. Had it not been for me, certain individuals would have been where?
At home.
And I think you saw what it caused when the gentleman came out and said, by the way, the originals. So you have to be very careful when you're talking about who makes the law.
The originals. kampumulemu katono nja kubatenga njira tulija kubatenga tumaliriza n'ensonga dino ebiri of course era situlu mu kutafuta amateeka bintu bino ebisinga tubireeta osobola okubitegeera Isabalamuzi w'eggwanga lino erya Uganda n'akulira ekitongole ekiramuzi n'ow'okuntiiko gwe twandyese nti junior ali wansi yamutwaire mu kooti nti Justice Esther Kisashi atwaire Isabalamuzi owekitiibwa Alphonse Owiny-Dollo amutwaire mu kooti ate tamutwaire mu kooti Supreme Court amutwaire mu kooti eri ku wansi etafuteise mateeka buti Isabalamuzi akulira ekitongole ekiramuzi yena alina okwidda yeewozeeko What does this one mean? Awo tujja okuba ate nga tutandikira otavaawo. Tumikitundu kyaffe ekisembayo neno program the platform. Program the platform tuli ku Baba TV. Neno TV ewakyebazinga ninze Sam Omwesigwa. Osobola okutunoonya ku mikutu gyaffe emiyunga abantu ku Twitter Baba TV Uganda, ku Facebook Baba Television Uganda, ne ku YouTube Baba TV Uganda. Osobola okuba ate nga ofuna enteekateeka edifaanano dino tustreaminga live ku website yaffe www.babatv.co.ug program daffe dendawulo baayo era tukakongera okuba ate nga tukuweereza n'ebiyaka bingi odda kusobola okuba ate nga obifuna tuliwo okuba ate nga tukuyiyikiza iwe ali eyo osobola okuba ate nga otegeera n'emikwano gyange abali ku nsalo ya Uganda esaidde eno Datololo Malaba nfunye ku amawulire nti waliwo badereva abalivuga ebyamaguzi ebiri kwingira mu iwanga lino erya Uganda abasinga badiringa ino mu mmere ya bisolo eyeva ebweru nkan concentrates musasi wange andaga nti abantu bano bakaba ku boda enaku 30 n'omwezi omulamba olw'omusolo omuyako gwali gwakaido gwa 15% ku concentrates ayenga kiteeberezebwa nti abalina okuba clearinga bali kwenda omusolo guno gwali gwakatandika ayi bano bazasule ni alias edde inuma myezi inuma wera omusolo gwagukaali kuba ate nga gutandika dogere kunaaba ekitongole kya Uganda Revenue Authority obwire buno bakuba nti ensonga eno tibagidiiku nti era tibakidiiku nti trucks dodiri eyo mukwano gwange Amula Albert ebitundu ebyo Gomasego sobola okuba ate nga onoonereza ku nsonga eno badreva batwaka akuba nti embeera eringa ebalemesiisa okuba nga bakola business kubanga balina okuyingiza ebyamaguzi ebyeno aye bakamala ku boda omwezi mulamba so ndakwongera okuba nga tubagoberera ensonga dino trucks dino disobola ekikumi 30 n'endala lunaku olweddo makonde gaife dasobola okuba ate nga obibona yona nayo sinzira okuba ate nga otubona twenda kutegeeza nti twongere okuba ate nga tukola twidafuna empiya nenda tumaliriza bw'oyagaana nga baba wakaalina okuuma abaana bademe alina otukobera ekyokola ngaaye eri yabamwemuluguunyaku nti yena tayidde kyakola oba nga bintu tabikola nga we bisaaniire ekoleka ife baakulembera tufaanana tutya. I was interested with the two issues jenkobe nga tuli kujja mukuwumula yafasi ya kaliisoliiso ono tidya Abannayuganda bati bamwikirizaganya tibamwikirikizaamu abantu bamulinzeemu ino bamulinze ino mukanwa bamukulira ino mu kirevu nti omukyala nga yakedda mu ofiisi buli muntu yavaayo buli omu yaleeta embi buli ngali ministry y'ebyeitaka ng'onaali eno kashiko kakosasi kalimu noonerezaako dino dyabula eno paka yena yalumukiire mu kooti aliko bakooti nti alipota yakosasi oidi parliament eri mu recess era buli muntu ali ku bunkenge parliament okwira mu recess report yakosasi eyaba mutulaki bino kwida ati kooti mutaikiriza report eyo kwida ainga akashiko kali crediting integrity eyo omuntu alina okunonereza kubakulupya mu Uganda alina okunonereza kubakulupya bali munonerezaako abakasano ba mu office
kibuzo kirungi ino kyoli kubuuza. I'll give you an example. Waliwo ekiseera mu America, I think it was Kennedy where president, then he appointed one of his relatives eyali quote unquote a criminal, and don't picking a lesson out of this.
Okay, let us term it as an example. Let's use it as an example.
Lwaki olonzo oyo ate ng'okiri bulungi nti n'asingayo kuba oba mufere mubi akati no bw'olikwenda okugema abayibi no ndaki mwibi naide engeri dayibwe engeri gye bakolamu. Please don't pick lessons out of that. I'm just saying that as an innocent statement.
Okay. Because let's use it as just a dummy somewhere.
Because words can be used denotatively or connotatively. So I am putting a disclaimer on that point. But you see, sometimes our actions catch up with us. Nditi amano niwe Samuel. I'm not sure choja kubaido. Tomorrow you may be a minister. You know, but some of the things you may say today may actually come to haunt you tomorrow. You know? Some of the statements that
perhaps the people I'm speaking about I
know.
By the way, you made allegations about one day when you on TV.
So sometimes you have to be very careful. So the important point is that the IGG's position, should be a position which
we are looking at the office, not an individual.
Yes. But even then, the office itself should be occupied by a person beyond taint. Ali azira ku ibala, or beyond any culpability in terms of criminal taintability, if I may use that word. So the argument you're proponing is some of these actions that were done before Omutona assuming office are some of the things that are being brought to haunt him today. Okay? That individual. But again, the question, as I said, you cannot deny or you cannot divorce that person who never did Amblano Mutuono, and Wanafuka in that position, Adakuba a different person from what he has been or she has been behind. And that's the debate that perhaps this issue change okwawa keninga for us today. The individual, whoever is pointing fingers, we may not really be so much about what you are doing now, but what you did yesterday is what is what.
Perhaps even somebody could have transformed. You've seen many here giving them examples.
That is the example.
Our friend this way. People are saying, hey, you used to do this, you used to this, how can you stand now for this?
Absolutely.
Somebody would say, I transformed.
Good point. Saul, before he became Paul, you remember, yato charingaina abantu ba Yesu for a long time, not so. But even when he converted, Yesu yambonekera. You remember that time? Niweje wa Peter. It took time for him to be accepted. So there could be that air around him or her for that purpose. But the point we are saying is that position be occupied with people who have no taint. Obviously, the question is there a person who doesn't have a taint on themselves?
In Uganda?
In humanity. Not even in Uganda per se.
Why do I say Uganda? Because I can plead for, I can be a lawyer for many Ugandans that ebintu ebindi bikolebwa ngetize katero bakusuula mushi mubuzibwa yenga. It's not because of you.
I know.
But because you're a public servant, basulenu ba public servants mu errors ayinga ba individual bali wansi because the public servant yaboneka then mwamutentinga kwesho yajanga abantu bona nayinga mukuba yakola shino ayinga it was not easy or making.
I know. But sometimes most of those games are also played by using Tamale Mirundi's words by mafia people who are instigated okuba nti fighting those individuals, because maybe they know those individuals are going to witch hunt them over certain things. Bali kwera likira somewhere ono ali position ai tutole obukaire bule bona what we didn't somewhere tumukubira let's cause a diversionary rather than let the man or woman concentrate on what on their job. So when the individual goes and says, by the way, I'm making an appeal against that, perhaps he's doing it in good faith, or perhaps he's saying, by the way, if it comes out, mpeire. So those are two arguments.
Can we have a law protecting such individuals? Because of this position,
protected.
This protection.
Leverage into You see, the problem with things to do with the criminality, even the president, by the way, is not immune in terms of criminality. In fact, again, when you read my book, Demystifying the Fountain of Honor, demystifying the executive constitutional mandate, I make these arguments of the impeachability of the president. Can a president be impeached, especially Ugandan president? We have seen it happen in America, where people like Donald Trump have been impeached, Clinton have been impeached, a number of individuals have been impeached. The question is, can you impeach a president today? What are those impeachable offenses that can actually cause them to say, by the way, I think resign, or else things are going bad, like other people have resigned in America, other presidents? That's the problem. That's the problem of constitutionality in our country. Those are the things that I think we're talking about. Do we have real constitutionalism, really, or do we have it simply so that's the game plan. So this ideology of saying that so-and-so is untouchable because he's in a certain position, I think should not be the case.
When you just talked about, I was looking at you, wondering if Uganda can give birth to that strong man, strong woman, who can stand and say, Mr. President, you've done this and this, and we feel like step aside. Be that we don't have that Ugandan here in Uganda. Let's leave that topic.
Yes.
Let me just speak it in English. What precedence will it set when the Chief Justice is dragged to the court he heads?
Good question. The question you're asking is in respect to the petition, the constitutional petition or interpretation, as it were, by virtue of Article 137 of the Constitution, in terms of whether or not Dr. Chisache has actually sued the following people, including the Chief Justice, as you know. Now, ordinarily, we as people who come from the judicial lineage, as you're aware, we would argue that that matter is res judicata, and therefore it's not for us to comment on it because it is subsisting before the courts. That is the position of the law, as it were. Now, we're going to talk about it not in that perspective for purposes of throwing light and maybe projecting who's going to win or who's going to lose, but perhaps as people who educate the nation in terms of legal dawns, if you like. That's the reason why we may say a little bit about it. But also, more importantly, because as we speak now, the matter actually is taking another arm, another thing. I've just heard that one of the people who is going to be perhaps an arbiter in terms of arbitration for purposes of what they call ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution, is my friend, Professor Sempebwa, where I worked for some time with the best law firm in Africa, if you like, for some time, where I was working there. So I would argue and say that even for purposes of just educating the masses in terms of the things that...
Out of the many questions is that now they have...
Absolutely. Justice Chisache, Dr. Chisache, if you like, has about 14 issues in terms of this petition. One of them is what they call the obstruction of justice. Her argument is mundobeire okufulumya ruling yange egemagana ni petition ya Chagulanyi versus Ani tibuhabulwa. You know, munemesa. Number 2, file yange mujintoireku. Number 3, mukozeise chifuba nga muli kujintolaku. Number 4, mulobi ojindiriza. Number 5, mulobi public okuliza byendi kwenda okwogera ku nsonga ensalawe yange. Number 6, musibyewo n'ebintu ebyenandibaire nkozesa. That's one of the petition. That's one ground, by the way. Eyindi mwasibawo ne office yange. Eyindi mundogere ku ebintu nga byonona erina lyange nti ndi mubi. Eyindi mulobye n'okumpa obusobozi okujja okufuna obwidandabi mu nsonga egemagana n'obulamu bwange. Eyindi mulobye muntere ku junior wange okuba nti nanfuga mu bintu ebigemagana n'ebintu ng'ate musinga obwegereze n'experience. Eyindi nti muntere ku investigation zede ekyama ediri kumbegabega. Eyindi nti muligezaako muntere ku emisango sange mumbatise ku ebisango sangu byentaakola. Eyindi mulobere irala complaints diarizing wa Kyagulanyi ne Mabirizi nga balisaba nti bana mwekiriza omukyalo afulumye ebintu bye nga bwe yandibeera abifulumya. Ebindi mundobeire liivu. Ebindi ba bodyguard bange ni driver wange mubalobere okuba allowance. Ebindi mulobeire okumpa emirimu timuli kumpa mundu oti mutyamiza wakatebe. Ebindi ni ba assistant bange bona mubande emeire. Ebindi mutaire ku report nti eri ebintu byenjingirira era emirimu gyange tijiri ku mulembe. Those are so grave accusations nga bolidi wana. And like you rightly said, the petition is made and abantu bali gezaako okoba nti bali responsible owekitiibwa mwene omulamuzi omukulu permanent secretary then commissioner or agemagani human resource then n'omuntu owundi abaira ni attorney general. Okay, those are people who are actually being joined in terms of that petition. Nga bwe nkobye, the matter is still ongoing, so we are not supposed to really divulge into the nitty-gritties of it, but we can comment generally for purposes of being legal as lecturers of law. Perhaps we can educate and enlighten people in terms of that transition. I actually comment, you know, until the good thing now with the twist in which it is taking, that there is now a possibility into this matter is going to go via arbitration, but with the likes of Senior Counsel Professor Sempewa as one of those people who are going to perhaps preside over this matter in terms of adjudicating the matter, is another good point for purposes of argument. But the point that I underscore is this: it's a constitutional petition. So this lady is seeking for an interpretation. You know, and if so, does the court mandate them? Does the law mandate them? So she wants court to pronounce itself in terms of those arguments. They're quite many and they're quite offensive. You know, for
isn't it testing the depth?
Yes.
So,
yes.
But isn't it testing the strength or the respect of Uganda in the constitutionalism?
Absolutely. It's a good test and it's a good precedent, because it's for the first time in history with Likubona, where perhaps a person who would be a subordinate of another directly taking another, especially a judicial officer, taking another in a constitutional court which is going to be presided over by people who ordinarily again still are subordinates of the person who they are actually doing what? No,
because that's what I was looking
absolutely.
at.
So that becomes a good precedent for us. But you see, that's what the law is about. That's the beauty of the law. The law, I'm a legal realist. I believe in the flexibility of the law. I believe in people like Ralph Wendell, Wendell Holmes, who argue that the law should actually resonate with society. You know, that's my school of thought in terms of jurisprudence. So I think this is a beautiful case that is presenting itself in terms of checking whether or not these tenets actually work. Can the Constitutional Court, in that capacity, act in that position? And also, there are instances, for example, where people can recuse themselves, perhaps without, if there's an appeal at a certain level, if the matter is thrown back to the Supreme Court, then obviously the individual who is quote unquote under test on this particular point will actually have to recuse himself. Because I'm under test, I have to recuse myself. So I think it's a good case for purposes of jurisprudence of this country, but also for purposes of us legal scholars who want to think outside the box and throw the box away.
Going back as we wind up, the type of judiciary we have in Uganda, who appoints them?
Good question.
What is the interest in this case? Can't it tell the fate of this case?
Good question. And even, by the way, the Judicial Service Commission is also party to this suit, by the way, by virtue of the fact that Yena is a party, Yena Misuse is on that post. So we're arguing that most of these positions actually green lighted by Judicial Service Commission, but obviously by the President's appointment directly and a recommendation of the Judicial Service Commission, as it were. So the point you are proponing indirectly is that, is there someone pulling strings because someone did not play the game as they wanted? That is perhaps the better question. Again, I will argue and say, in my book, that there are instances where the court or judicial officers have actually become more executive-minded than the executive itself. I will also argue by quoting Professor Loko Nyango, where he makes a very serious comment and he said, sometimes courts do politics in this country.
And I'm just wondering, you know, sometimes when I look keenly at somebody, I may think I'm seeing that, but I'm seeing things beyond the wall. Even when this one ends, in any way it will end. Of course it will end positively, I believe. Will these two still work together?
Good question. Like I said, again, in terms of professionalism, these are things that I think people should learn to. I think it was Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King said, I think a time has come where people have to learn to disagree without being evidently disagreeable. So you may agree to disagree on a principle.
That applies so much in developed countries.
I know.
But in struggling economies like Uganda.
It applies in developed countries, like rightly say, and perhaps that's also what brings up my other argument in terms of my book called Ubuntu Bulama and the Law towards a new constitutional dispensation, where I'm actually making it a must that we should apply Ubuntu Bulama and the Law in everything we do. Issues like ADR, Matoputu, Gachacha, those aspects where we can have reconciliation. Okay, where we can have, where we can blend ourselves together in spite of our differences, rather than simply putting on rough fist, red fist, and simply say, you don't cross my way, you know, and those arguments of fighting until death does us apart.
Program the platform. Sere bisingo amata mamanji tina abaisentebe tokwogera okunji tina okusinga omusango. Kansubira nti ensonga dino muditegeire. Of course akaire tubana katono aye mba nenda wabakunisha otegeera. Songa gye tusembizaayo mulamuzi ono gwe tuli kwogera ali wansi w'essaabalamuzi. Counsel akusomeire ebintu ebimuniiza. Nze nga kyembwenemu ekindeetera okweraliikirira eno n'okuba nti yataayo yakuba nti how can my junior be above me? It is a very good question and so hard to answer. Wobanga niwo omulamuzi ojjo omala osale aye ng'oli gy'asala aye nga olugoba likoba nti ni junior ni mukamaawo. Counsel tusiibule.
That is true, and those are some of the challenges that we have in life. I keep telling people until life is a journey, not a destination. Sometimes even you can even do a law wakobote ndikolere kalino kugema somewhere. Eventually you find yourself ngaiteka kaidi opposite because absolutely. Yeah. So I think before we call it quit, before God says amazemi limoje, we know kuba very careful the things that we do, and I think we should live in terms of I think there's a philosopher David Gale. David Gale yayogera yakobati, it's not the eat that you want, it's the fantasy of the eat. That's why they say the hunt is sweeter than the kill. In most cases, life is like a mirage. You keep chasing this image and you think you'll get it. Because sometimes when you get what you really think you want, you discover,
again you yearn for
and then you begin yearning for what? In others, the hunt is sweeter than the kill. So, but he said it's these small little moments like integrity, self-sacrifice, humility, love, tender, those speak louder voices. Dr. King said, at a time when I don't want to be remembered by so many accolades. No. I want to be remembered for being a drum major in drumming the drum of justice, drumming the drum of peace. Ubuntu Bulama and the Law is what I'm talking about. Reconciliation. We don't want to become leaders. I have been a leader for some time. I was president of Law Society at my university. I was first guild president from a non-Macedonian institution. I am now the principal of the Petroleum Institute. So I'm a leader. Who knows tomorrow? Maybe it may be a calling for God to make me a member of
Parliament. You may replace Onao but Mao.
Who knows? Only God knows. So as long as we are creatures on earth, we simply do submit ourselves to God the Almighty, and we are His servants. And our prayer should always be, God give us the strength to do so that we can affect our societies in a much better place. So that when we are gone, we have left this society much better than we did what? Than we found it.
Thank you so much for joining us. It has been wonderful having you. Please, I can't underrate your efforts to the development of the community. One scripture in the Bible says that he has fought a good fight. I think we've made it. And even me, when time comes when I'm normal, I want to be recalled and remembered for the small pieces of advice that can transform your life, so that you can be a desirable and an integrate citizen. Ninza Samu Mwesigwa, late sebishabazinga wabusoga fumbu ebyanda nebyanda.